The Great One's Journey by the Liar Who Lies Chapter 18. Request. It had been 2 weeks since they left the village. Rimuru and Jack were currently walking on grassy plains stretched all over. To the north was a city with big walls and tall towers. To the west, a mountain range. To the south was the route they came from, and to the east, a large forest. "There it is, there's the capital of this territory, Rabianai," exclaimed Rimuru's student excitedly. Rimuru chuckled at the boy's enthusiasm. When he asked the boy if there were anywhere he wanted to live, the boy instantly mentioned this place. The only other time when he'd been this excited was when he got his new skills in the dungeon. As for how they'd found this place, well, when Rimuru said that asking for directions from his manas ruined any fun he'd have, he forgot to mention that getting lost could get very annoying and in turn ruin even more fun. The retired supreme ruler could practically taste the smugness in his eternal companion's words as she told him the location, no matter how hard she tried to hide it. "Slow down. The city's not going anywhere," he said as he saw the boy practically jumping and double jumping through the air. He smiled. Ever since the boy got those new skills of his, he'd spent almost all his time using them to have fun and mess around. He remembered when he was that way. Correction. Master did not have much fun with his skills. You almost always try to ignore they existed before you gained responsibility over your subjects. He rolled his eyes. There was nothing wrong with being careful over using his skills. They continued walking until they reached the entrance where plenty of people were entering and leaving the city. Rimuru remembered his time at Dwargon when he was challenged by a few troublemakers at the line similar to the ones they were in. He wondered if anything similar would happen here. "Excuse me. Are you Ms. Rimuru and Mr. Jack?" asked a guard nearby, suddenly. Jack looked giddy over being called so respectfully. Rimuru was suspicious. Where'd they heard of them? "Our archmage wants to meet with you. He wants to thank you for your deeds at Rollhart," he explained. Oh, that made sense. He looked over the long line in front of him. He guessed there was nothing wrong with meeting the so-called Master of Magic. "All right. Please, let us the way," he agreed. Rabianai was much more populated than the port. It was very lively, from the market area, the neighborhood, the entertainment area, and even to the roofs. Jack could even see a few people flying or jumping through buildings. He really felt like he was in another world. The guard led them through walkways and alleyways, up to the residential area, then to the upperclassmen's living quarters, heading to the towers in the center of the city. They entered the tallest of the 6 towers, the one being circled by the 5 shorter ones. Inside, the guard talked to an attendant of the tower who then proceeded to lead them to a circular platform. When Jack, Rimuru, and the attendant were all on the platform, it suddenly moved upwards, startling the boy. His teacher held his shoulder to prevent him from jumping off it and calmed him down by rubbing his head and telling him it was safe. When he calmed down, he was able to hear and make a mental map of the place. All he heard were people busily moving around and doing some important-looking things. He shook his head. When they reached the topmost room, the attendant opened the door and escorted them inside before leaving. He clicked his tongue, scanning over the place. It was a high-ceiling room with many items inside. A few he recognized, while most he didn't. He saw books on the shelves, potions on the racks, parchments on the tables, and many more. Across the room was a desk where an old man sat behind it. He had a white beard and wore a velvet robe. "Welcome, esteemed guests. I have been wanting to meet you for quite some time now. Please, sit down," the old man said with a smile as he pointed at the couches to the side of his desk. Once everyone was sat there, he saw his teacher also smile and say, "We are grateful that you consider us worthy of meeting you." The old man just waved it off and answered, "Come, now. None of that formal bullshit. Name's Mario Magna, good to meet ya." Jack blinked in surprise. The geezer really said that. And to his shock, his teacher replied as if it were natural, "All right. Well, what do you want, you old fogey? You clearly have more plans than just to thank us." The fogey laughed before continuing. "What gave that away? Was it the owls? It's got to be the owls, hasn't it?" "Yep," his teacher confirmed. The old man started to shake his hand that was curled into a fist and exclaim, "Damn them and their big mouths. One of these days, I ought to teach 'em a lesson." What were they even talking about right now? Jack massaged his confused head. The geezer then got to the point. "Well, I wanted to ask you if Jack heard someone walk to the door before they knocked it. "Come in," said the bearded man. It was another attendant. The attendant bowed in apology and spoke, "I'm sorry to bother you, Great Archmage, but I came to inform you the Blade and His Highness the Imperial Prince have arrived." The old wizard's tone turned lighter. "Perfect timing. Send them in right now. I was going to offer the same thing to them." "Oh, I hope you don't mind having more guests come." His ever-calm teacher replied coolly, "It's fine. Like they say, the more the merrier." The old man laughed and replied, "I've never heard of that phrase, but I'll be keeping it in mind for sure." What is even happening right now? First was with the old man going to thank us, then it was about owls, and then a prince shows up. What have I gotten myself into? Thought Jack as he sat in the middle of this chaos. The sealed monster sea wasn't always called that way. Studies and legends dated back to the Chaos era referred this place as the Sea of Monsters. Nobody really knew how it was formed, but all records had shown that it was found after the final war of the heavens. Back then, none dared approach this sea due to the deadly magicules and mutated monsters surrounding it. It was not until millennia later that it was sealed away by the mages of old and became the sealed monster sea. The seal had weakened after the day of cursing, but luckily a new generation of water mages were able to stop it from fully breaking. They weren't able to seal it permanently once more, requiring to renew the seal from time to time. So, they left it to their descendants to continue on their burden. The current most prominent family of these water mages were called the Drawn household. They were responsible for keeping the seal up and running. Like all the other households, they lived in the Sealer's Isles, the islands that were formed in the middle of that sea. There was a tradition where whichever household was most powerful at the time, their leader shall be the one to lead all the households. Elsa Drawn was the current leader of the Sealer's Isles. Chapter 19. Plea. The first one Jack saw walk into the room was a blonde-haired boy around his age. His red eyes foretold things similar to the rabbits he saw. His grin that he flashed when they looked at each other added a feeling of ferocity that clashed with his young form. They looked at each other in the eye and instantly thought the same thing. "I want to fight him." Jack didn't know what made him come to that conclusion, but he knew he needed to test himself against him. The other boy looked like he thought similarly, what with his grin widening. The next one to come was a middle-aged man with a horizontal slash mark on the middle of his face. His wild red hair was tied to a high ponytail. The most similar thing he could compare this man's eyes to was his teacher's own eyes when she was teaching him swordsmanship. He shuddered. The both of their clothing contrasted. The older had simpler clothing similar to his teacher, while the younger's was more extravagant. "Blade, old friend, how have you been?" asked the old wizard. To which he answered with a simple, same old, same old. The old man then turned his head towards the boy and nodded as he said, "Your Highness." The boy just grunted, though still grinning. The old man then invited them to sit. The two sat down on the couch opposite to theirs. "So, what is it that you need, Rio?" inquired the Blade. "I'm getting to that," was his answer. Both parties then looked and stared at each other for a short while until they were interrupted by the old man. "Well, now that we're all here, I'll just lay it out to you. I want your students to enroll in the Arcanus Academy." Silence. Absolute silence was prevalent for a few seconds. In a complete twist of turns for both boys, their teachers both said, "We accept." "But teach, but must," both were then silenced by their own teachers. The old man suddenly said, Now, kids, why don't you go play downstairs while the adults talk to each other?" The both looked to their own teachers, who actually urged them to do as the geezer said. They then eyed at each other. Both of them knew what they'd do downstairs. As they walked out of the room, Mario's demeanor suddenly became much more serious and he snapped his fingers. All possible exits and spots for eavesdropping were suddenly covered with magic barriers to prevent anything, even sound, from escaping. "Now, that's out of the way. Thank you for accepting my plea," the Archmage thanked. "Are you sure we could trust this woman, Mario?" asked the Blade. He nodded. "I'd trust her with all that I am." The Blade then nodded and stayed silent. Let's cut it short. The Demon Lord's forces have infiltrated this city. They have begun to suspect that this is our resistance's base of operations, the old man informed them. The demon's resistance was created by a group of demons who have defected from the Demon Lord's forces. They were a group who sought for peace between the humans and demons and consisted of those who believed in these beliefs. Mario Magna, the Archon of Magic, and the Blade of the Great Nine were both key members of the Resistance, with both having demon blood in them. The Blade was a half-breed from a misfortunate encounter between a human and a demon. This knowledge was kept secret from the world except for the Great Nine and the upper echelons of the Remnant Council. It was why he had the worst reputation among the Nine. Even if they couldn't tell what he was, they could tell many false rumors about him. It was also the reason why he was tied to the imperial family. It was so that they could keep him in check in case he decided to switch sides. As for Mario, only he and Rimuru knew. "What do you need me to do, friend?" the half-demon asked with resolve. The Archmage answered, "I need the both of you to stay here for a while under the guise of accompanying your students to school." Consider it done, he accepted without hesitation. Before the conversation could continue, a great ruckus could be heard from below. "Oh ho ho, it seems the kids are starting to have some fun." The conversation suddenly took to a lighter tone as the geezer said that. "Tisk. That damn boy can't seem to stay put," complained the Blade as he stood up and walked to the door. Mario put down the barrier temporarily to let the Blade through before he put it up again. Now, only Rimuru and Mario were the ones left in the room. "So, have you come to erase me, oh Great One?" the old man said serenely. Rimuru, who had been silent this entire time, decided to answer, "Me, killing Diablo's prized disciple." "No way." Before Diablo left the world, he assigned someone to take the mantle of the world's arbiter, a demon lord. He trained a boy who apprenticed under him to fill this role. That boy was Mario Magna. Or rather, Agamamori, the first and only true demon lord after the Day of Cursing. Though his job was to keep the world's inhabitants in line with his demonic powers, after centuries of being in that position he began to search for a better role than to bring terror upon the world. And that role was the peacemaker, the one who would bring peace to the war-torn world. At first he scoffed at the idea, thinking such a thing would be against his role as arbiter. But as he pondered more and more, he began to think both roles weren't so different after all. In fact, he thought both could go hand in hand. He wanted to try it. But a part of him told him that his higher-ups would not like what he would be doing. After thinking over the dilemma, he decided to try it regardless, for his sin was curiosity, and his virtue was wisdom, and he couldn't go down without at least trying. If he failed, then others would replace him. He wasn't that important in the grand scheme of things. But if he succeeded, then he could keep his job and life, and many lives would be spared from the senseless brutality that polluted the world. "How you do your job matters not to me. What matters is you don't disappoint Diablo, and in turn not disappoint me," the Great One said. Agama sighed in relief. He felt weight lift off his shoulders. He felt free. But most of all, he felt happy. Happy that he could get this chance to change the world without raising the ire of his master and his master's master. "Your spirit owls were very interesting," the Great One mused. Agama chuckled as he explained, "One of the abilities of my ultimate skill, Athena the Seeker, which I evolved from the skill, Seeker, given to me by my master, allows me to summon artificial spirits created by said skill and allows me to see through their eyes, giving me a literal bird's eye view on the surroundings." He continued, "Though, after some time my owls started gaining sentience and had ended up acquiring eccentric personalities." He finished it off with a chuckle. Rimuru shook his head from side to side. It turned out this kid was also such a monster. Rimuru then asked, "Why haven't you regained control of the forces?" To that Agama answered, as if resigned, "While I had been able to convince some demons to join me, many of them revolted. Over the years I battled many of those posing as demon lords who tried to take my place, each of them getting harder to beat by the day until one day I could no longer beat one. The current demon lord is as strong as me in terms of power. While I may be a true demon lord, with the nature of my skills, my powers could only prove to be at most at the special A rank according to the ancients' ways of calculating strength." Rimuru nodded and said, "I see. Well, good work keeping this world running until now." Agama smiled widely, "Your compliment means everything to me, oh Great One." Rimuru sighed before he stood up and walked towards the door. "I need to take care of my kid, too. Tell me more about the classes and who I should be protecting later." Agama felt his heart almost burst with joy. To gain the approval of the Great One was a great deal. And to have the Great One help you themselves was akin to a miracle. He quickly nodded and said, "As per your will, OGR, he was suddenly interrupted. And stop calling me that. Both boys were currently face to face, their weapons drawn. They were both panting, exhausted from their spar. But both were smiling. Both were really happy. Neither looked like they wanted to stop. Once again, they ran towards each other and clashed their weapons.